Today we're going to talk about how African Americans got the right to vote, starting with the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment granted all African Americans the right to vote, but only the males. Unlike the 24th Amendment, which granted everyone the right to vote, all African Americans the right to vote. The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 by Lyndon B. Johnson, and we're going to talk about the struggle that took place to pass that act. Selma, it was an example of a nonviolent protest led by Martin Luther King, who was part in the passing of the Voting Rights Act. Freedom Summer was when college students went down to Mississippi to try and exercise the right to vote, and we will see what happened when they did that and the resistance that the white community had on them. Mississippi Burning is what happened when they went down to Mississippi to vote. And yeah. And then the themes are identity, politics and power, and culture. Synthesis would be how the struggle to get these rights passed, the right to vote or to abolish slavery or to marry a white woman, has had this struggle throughout time up until the 1960s, when many of these rights were passed, these acts were passed with the Civil Rights Act or the Voting Rights Act. Today, we are going to talk about the 15th Amendment that was passed in 1870 during Reconstruction, but after the Civil War. Okay, the 15th Amendment guaranteed only African Americans the right to vote, but only the males. How crazy is that? So, people didn't really like African Americans getting rights, so they figured out ways to try and stop them. These are called restrictions on African Americans. So, one way was poll taxes. So, after the Civil War, African Americans were very poor and they couldn't afford many things, including poll taxes. So that's why they were there, so that if they can't pay to go to the polls, then they can't vote. Next, literacy tests. So, African Americans in the 1800s weren't very educated, so it was hard for them to get the right to vote if they had to take tests. And it was unfair because not everyone had to take the test, only African Americans. That's a wrap. The 24th Amendment, it was passed in 1964 during the Civil Rights Movement, of course. And it was made so that all African Americans had the right to vote, not just the males. Okay? So, one great thing about the 24th Amendment is that it banned poll taxes. So rather than having these poor African Americans going to the polls stations and voting and having to pay a big sum of money, they didn't have to pay it because it was banned. What's up? The Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965 by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Many civil rights activists went to President Lyndon B. Johnson and they were like, pass this act, but he was like, no, that's not what my people want, because most of the people that supported him were white and they didn't really like African Americans. So, the Voting Rights Act, it allowed all African Americans to vote, not just the white males. It was like the 24th Amendment. So, again, just like in the 1860s and 70s, many people tried to restrict African Americans from voting. So, this time, they started closing the DMVs, which African Americans could go to get their license to vote. Okay, and one of the major activists that was pushing for this Voting Rights Act to be passed was Martin Luther King. And he would go to the White House and visit President Lyndon B. Johnson, and they would talk about when they're going to pass this. So going to the White House wasn't really getting the president's attention. So Martin Luther King started doing marches. Selma. It was taking place in Alabama, led by Martin Luther King Jr. Okay. He was basically the leader of the civil rights movement. And he did nonviolent ways to protest their rights. He was fighting to get more laws passed so African Americans could get more rights in nonviolent ways. So marches were an example of a nonviolent form of protest. So, okay, Selma, they marched from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama, and at the end of their marching path, there was a line of police. So, and then the police tried to get them to turn around, but they didn't want to do that because they were still fighting for their rights. Okay, and so the police started advancing, and then they attacked them. Now it's called Bloody Sunday, because everyone died. But so as Selma or Bloody Sunday was broadcasted over live TV, there was more support from the middle class white people for these African Americans trying to get the right to vote, because they saw that the police weren't trying to help them, they were hindering their movement. We have Freedom Summer right here. It took place in Mississippi, and we have African American college students and white college students that took a train down to Mississippi to perform the act of voting. So, they wanted to get the right to vote, but of course, there is the white people, they want to restrict them African Americans from voting. So, the KKK stops these white college students from voting by capturing them and murdering them. That is Mississippi Burning. So Mississippi Burning and Freedom Summer always go together. The themes for African Americans obviously getting the right to vote. So cultural, so we have the African American community coming together and working till the end to get the right to vote and other rights. Okay. Number 2, we have identity. These African Americans not knowing if they will be able to vote or not, and not knowing if they are really citizens, because every other person in America had the right to vote, and that made them citizens. And we have policies and power from when LBJ, he passed the Voting Rights Act when he was president. Okay, we have terror tactics. So when African Americans went to the polls to practice their right to vote, the KKK members who performed these terror tactics on them, they would either force them to vote for their party, or they would just abduct them basically and kill them, because they didn't believe that African Americans had the right to vote. 15th Amendment. It guaranteed African American males to have the right to vote. Only the males. So we took the 15th Amendment in the 1860s and 70s, and we continued that struggle through history up until the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed. So almost basically 100 years, this has been a struggle for the African American community.